In this captivating tale of self-discovery and unexpected love, follow Sienna Calder as she flees her arranged wedding to find refuge in an old barn owned by reclusive billionaire Julian Merrick. Together, they rebuild not just a barn, but their lives standing against those who would use them for power and wealth. Before we begin this story, comment below where you're watching from. The summer sun beat down on the elegant Preston estate, where white roses lined the path to a grand outdoor altar. Inside the main house, Sienna Calder stared at her reflection in a full-length mirror. Her ivory wedding dress sparkled with tiny crystals, and her dark hair was swept up in an elegant style beneath a delicate veil. "You look perfect," said her mother, Catherine Calder, adjusting the train of the dress. "Richard will be speechless when he sees you." Sienna forced a smile, but couldn't ignore the knot in her stomach. It had been there for weeks, growing tighter as the wedding day approached. She wasn't nervous, she was terrified. "Mom, can I have a moment alone, please?" Sienna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Catherine frowned. "We don't have time for cold feet, Sienna. The guests are arriving, and the Preston family has spent a fortune on this wedding. Remember, this union will save our family name after your father's financial scandal." "Just 5 minutes," Sienna pleaded. With obvious reluctance, Catherine left the room. As soon as the door closed, Sienna sank into a chair and fought back tears. The truth was crushing her. She didn't love Richard Preston. Their engagement had been arranged by their families, her mother desperate to restore their social standing, and Richard's father eager to acquire the Calder family's remaining land holdings. Through the window, Sienna saw more cars arriving. The music had started. In less than an hour, she would be Mrs. Richard Preston, trapped in a loveless marriage to a man who had barely looked at her during their 6-month engagement. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard, "Make sure you stick." To the script during the vows, "My father is watching." Something inside Sienna snapped. Without thinking, she grabbed her small purse, slipped off her uncomfortable heels, and opened the bedroom window. The old oak tree outside had been her escape route as a teenager, and today it would serve her one last time. The bark was rough against her hands as she climbed down, her expensive dress catching on branches and tearing. Rain clouds had gathered, darkening the afternoon sky as Sienna ran barefoot across the manicured lawn, away from the main entrance where guests were arriving. She knew the old trail that led into the hills. As a child, she'd explored these woods countless times. The rain started to fall, gentle at first, then turning into a downpour. Sienna's makeup streamed down her face, her hair falling loose as the veil tangled in low branches. She didn't care. Each step away from the Preston estate felt like freedom. The rain soaked through her dress as she climbed higher into the hills. Her feet were muddy and scratched, but the pain was nothing compared to the relief flooding through her. Thunder rumbled overhead as Sienna spotted an old barn in the distance, surrounded by overgrown grass and wildflowers. Out of breath and shivering, she pushed open the weathered door and stepped inside. The barn was surprisingly clean, with fresh hay bales stacked against one wall and the scent of wood polish in the air. Someone had been taking care of this place. Exhausted, Sienna collapsed onto a hay bale. Her dress was ruined, her body trembling from cold and adrenaline. But for the first time in months, she could breathe. "I can't go back," she whispered to herself as her eyelids grew heavy. "I won't." She drifted into an uneasy sleep, unaware that the barn's owner was about to return. Julian Merrick parked his black truck at the end of the gravel path, leading to his property. The rain had stopped, leaving a fresh, clean scent in the air. He stepped out, his tall frame dressed in simple jeans and a button-down shirt that did little to hide his wealth. Despite his casual appearance, everything about Julian spoke of money and power. 5 years ago, Julian had been the golden boy of Wall Street, the youngest CEO to take a company public and walk away with billions. Then came the betrayal that changed everything. His fiancée and his business partner had conspired behind his back, stealing proprietary technology and attempting to force him out of his own company. Julian had fought back, exposing their plan. But the public battle had been ugly, with the press painting him as cold, calculating, and impossible. No one saw the grief that drove him to sell his shares and disappear from public life. No one except his loyal attorney knew he'd bought this remote property, complete with the old barn he'd been restoring by hand. Today marked 5 years since he'd walked away from it all. Julian had come to the barn to remember, to reflect, and to find peace in the solitude he'd grown to prefer over the chaos of his former life. He opened the barn door and froze. There, asleep on a hay bale, was a woman in a torn wedding dress. Julian's first instinct was to call security. Then he remembered he had none. His second thought was to wake her and demand she leave. But something about her stopped him. Her face, even in sleep, showed signs of distress. Her bare feet were dirty and scratched, her dress ripped in several places. This wasn't some reporter who had tracked him down. This was someone running from something, just like he had done. Julian stood there, unsure what to do. When the woman suddenly opened her eyes, she bolted upright, fear flashing across her face as she scrambled backward. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I didn't know anyone owned this place. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just couldn't go through with it." Her voice broke on the last words, and Julian saw the raw truth in her eyes. Without speaking, he walked to a cabinet, pulled out a clean blanket and handed it to her. "Thank you," she whispered, wrapping it around her shoulders. "You're running from your wedding," Julian said. It wasn't a question. Sienna nodded. "I should go. I don't want to trespass." "It's still raining," Julian replied, nodding toward the window where drops had begun to fall again. "And you're barefoot." "I can't go back," Sienna said, her voice stronger. "Now, I won't marry someone I don't love, who doesn't love me, just because our families made a deal." Julian's expression softened slightly. "I've got a farmhouse about half a mile from here. You can clean up, use the phone if you need to call someone." "I don't have anyone to call," Sienna admitted. "My mother arranged this marriage to save our family's reputation after my father's business scandal. If I go home, she'll just force me to reschedule the wedding." Julian studied her for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Sienna." "Sienna Calder." The name rang a bell. Julian vaguely remembered reading about Martin Calder's fall from grace, a respected businessman caught in a Ponzi scheme that had cost investors millions. "Julian Merrick," he said, not offering his hand. Sienna's eyes widened slightly. "The Julian Merrick? The tech billionaire who disappeared?" "Former tech billionaire," Julian corrected. "Now I'm just a man with a barn." Sienna pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I need to disappear for a while too. Just a few days to figure out what to do next. Please, I won't be any trouble." Julian rarely allowed anyone into his carefully constructed solitude, but something about Sienna's situation struck a chord. He knew what it was like to be trapped by other people's expectations. "You can stay," he said finally, "on one condition." "What is it?" Sienna asked cautiously. "You work," Julian stated flatly. "I'm restoring this barn and the farmhouse. If you stay, you help. I don't do guests." Sienna looked down at her ruined wedding dress and laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise them both. "Deal. Though I should warn you, I've never fixed anything in my life." "Everyone starts somewhere," Julian replied, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Come on, let's get you some dry clothes." As they walked through the rain toward the farmhouse, neither of them knew that this chance encounter would change both their lives forever. Nor did they realize that back at the Preston estate, panic had turned to anger, and the search for the runaway bride had already begun. Richard Preston slammed his fist on the table. "What do you mean she's gone?" Catherine Calder was white-faced with fury. "She must have climbed out the window. Her shoes are still here, but her purse is gone." "This is humiliating," Richard's father, Harold Preston, hissed. 300 guests waiting and the bride runs away?" "We'll find her," Catherine insisted. "She can't have gone far." Harold's expression darkened. "She'd better hope we don't." Nobody embarrasses the Preston family and gets away with it. Outside the window, dark clouds gathered over Blackstone Hill, where an unlikely friendship was about to bloom in an old barn, one that would soon be threatened by forces neither Sienna nor Julian could anticipate. The farmhouse was small but surprisingly elegant. Exposed wooden beams crossed the ceiling, and large windows let in natural light. As Julian led Sienna inside, She noticed how everything was meticulously organized, not what she had expected from a reclusive billionaire. "Bathrooms upstairs," Julian said, grabbing some clothes from a drawer. "These will be too big, but they're clean. There's food in the kitchen when you're ready." Sienna accepted the clothes with a grateful nod. "Thank you. I know this is strange." Julian's expression remained guarded. "Strange became normal for me a long time ago." In the bathroom, Sienna peeled off her ruined wedding dress and looked at herself in the mirror. Her makeup was smeared, her hair a tangled mess. She had been so focused on escaping that she hadn't thought about what came next. Where would she go? What would she do? Her mother had controlled every aspect of her life for so long that freedom felt as terrifying as it did exciting. The hot shower washed away the mud and tears. Afterward, she put on Julian's clothes, a soft flannel shirt, and sweatpants that she had to roll up several times at the waist and ankles. When she came downstairs, Julian was in the kitchen making sandwiches. "Better?" he asked, glancing up. "Much," Sienna replied, sitting at the small wooden table. "I'm still trying to process that I'm in Julian Merrick's kitchen wearing his clothes." Julian placed a sandwich and a cup of coffee in front of her. "I'm not that person anymore. The business genius who walked away from billions." Sienna asked. "The papers called you cold and calculating." "The papers didn't know anything," Julian said sharply. Then, more softly, "But I guess you understand that now." Sienna took a bite of her sandwich. "You mean because I'm the daughter of Martin Calder, the financial criminal? The man whose mistakes I'm supposed to pay for by marrying Richard Preston?" "Something like that," Julian nodded. "The world loves simple stories, heroes and villains. The truth is always messier." They ate in silence for a while, the rain pattering against the window. "So," Julian finally said, "what can you do?" Sienna looked confused. "What do you mean?" "You agreed to work. What skills do you have?" Sienna felt her face flush with embarrassment. "I have a business degree I've never used. I can plan parties, I can smile at people I hate." She paused. "Not much that's useful here, I'm afraid." To her surprise, Julian laughed, a short, rusty sound, as if he hadn't used it in a while. "Honesty. That's a start. Don't worry, I can teach you the rest." That night, Sienna slept in a small guest room with a patchwork quilt and a window that faced the barn. Despite the softness of the bed, she struggled to sleep, haunted by images of her mother's face when she discovered the empty room, of Richard's, cold eyes of all those guests witnessing her humiliation of the Preston family. She was up before dawn, watching the sunrise paint the hills gold. When she went downstairs, Julian was already in the kitchen drinking coffee. "Early riser?" he asked. "Couldn't sleep," Sienna admitted. "Too much thinking." Julian nodded. "Work helps with that. We start in 30 minutes." True to his word, half an hour later they were at the barn. Julian showed her how to sand rough wood, explaining the grain pattern and the proper technique. "Always go with the grain, never against it," he instructed, guiding her hand. "Patience matters more than strength." Sienna was awkward at first, her soft hands unused to manual labor, but Julian was a surprisingly patient teacher. By midday, her arms ached, but she felt a strange satisfaction looking at the smooth wooden post she had finished. "Not bad," Julian said, inspecting her work. "You learn quickly." It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd heard from him. Sienna found herself smiling. What's next? Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Mornings were spent working on the barn, sanding, painting, fixing loose boards. Julian taught her how to use basic tools, how to mix paint, how to see the potential in something broken. In the afternoons, they worked in the garden beside the farmhouse, pulling weeds and planting vegetables. In the evenings, they shared simple meals, their conversations gradually becoming less awkward. Sienna learned that Julian spent most of his time designing sustainable housing concepts, which he donated anonymously to non-profit organizations. He still had money, not the billions he once had, but enough to live comfortably and fund projects he believed in. "Why don't you take credit for your work?" she asked one night as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. Julian was quiet for a moment. "When your name becomes bigger than your work, you lose perspective. I learned that the hard way." On the fourth day, While they were fixing a section of the barn roof, Julian asked about her family. "My father was a good man who made bad choices," Sienna said, handing him a nail. "When his investment firm collapsed, he couldn't face the people he'd hurt. He had a heart attack 2 years ago. And your mother pushed you toward Richard Preston to restore the family fortune," Julian finished. Sienna nodded. "The Prestons wanted our land for development. I was part of the package deal." She paused. "What about your family?" Julian hammered a nail with more force than necessary. "My parents died when I was in college. Car accident. I have a younger brother, Alex. We don't speak anymore." "What happened?" Sienna asked gently. Julian's face closed off. "Another day, maybe." He climbed down from the roof. "That's enough for today." That night, Sienna woke to the sound of a vehicle approaching. She peered through the window and saw headlights coming up the gravel drive. Fear gripped her. Had they found her? She ran downstairs to find Julian already at the door, a baseball bat in hand. "Stay back," he ordered as the car stopped, and a man got out. "It's just me, boss," called a friendly voice. "Got those supplies you ordered?" Julian relaxed, setting the bat aside. "It's okay. That's just Tom. He makes deliveries for me." Tom was a cheerful older man who seemed unsurprised to find a woman in Julian's house. He unloaded boxes of supplies, chatting easily about the weather and local gossip. "By the way," he said as he was leaving, "there's been some strangers asking questions in town. Looking for a runaway bride, they said. Offering money for information." He glanced at Sienna knowingly. "Thought you should know." After Tom left, Julian turned to Sienna. "They're looking for you." Sienna wrapped her arms around herself. "I should go. I'm putting you at risk by staying here." "Where would you go?" Julian asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I can't hide. Forever." Julian was quiet for a long moment. "One more week," he finally said. "The barn's almost finished. Stay until it's done." Sienna searched his face. "Why are you helping me?" "Maybe I'm tired of being alone," Julian replied softly. "Or maybe I just understand what it's like to need an escape." The next morning, they worked side by side in comfortable silence. Sienna had learned to anticipate Julian's needs, handing him tools before he asked for them. They moved around each other with an easy rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. During a water break, Julian surprised her by asking, "Do you miss it?" "Your old life?" Sienna considered the question. "I miss certain comforts, hot baths, clothes that fit." She smiled when Julian glanced at her rolled-up pant legs. "But I don't miss feeling trapped. I don't miss pretending." "Pretending what?" Julian asked. "That I was happy with the path chosen for me," Sienna said. "That marrying for money and status was enough." Julian nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I pretended too. That success meant more than integrity, that I could trust people who only saw me as a means to an end." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the barn, Julian showed her how to swing a hammer properly. "You're holding back," he said, standing behind her. "Don't be afraid of your strength." His hands covered hers, adjusting her grip, and Sienna became acutely aware of his closeness, the warmth of his breath on her neck. Something shifted between them in that moment, an awareness that hadn't been there before. Later that evening, as they shared dinner, Julian asked, "What will you do when you leave here?" The question hung in the air, reminding them both that their time together was temporary. "Start over," Sienna said with determination. "Find a job, a small apartment, build a life that's mine." Julian's phone rang, interrupting their conversation. His expression darkened as he looked at the screen. "I need to take this," he said, stepping outside. Through the window, Sienna could see him pacing, his body language tense. When he returned, his face was grim. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing you need to worry about," Julian replied, but the warmth had left his voice. That night, Sienna couldn't sleep again. She crept downstairs for a glass of water and heard Julian in his office, his voice low, but angry. "I don't care what he's threatening, Sam. I'm not coming back," he was saying. "Find another way to handle it." The next morning, Julian was distant, lost in thought. They worked on the barn, but the easy companionship of previous days had vanished. Sienna wanted to ask what was troubling him, but respected his privacy. Instead, She focused on finishing the barn doors, carefully painting them the deep blue color Julian had chosen. By late afternoon, the barn was nearly complete, transformed from a neglected structure into something beautiful. "It's like a different place," Sienna said, stepping back to admire their work. Julian nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. "Everything can be rebuilt if you're willing to put in the work." The moment was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Julian tensed, moving protectively in front of Sienna. "Were you expecting someone?" she whispered. "No," Julian said, his voice hard. "Get inside the barn and stay there until I come for you." Sienna hesitated, then ducked inside the barn, leaving the door cracked open enough to see the expensive black car that had pulled up. A tall, well-dressed man stepped out, not Richard or anyone from the Preston family, but someone with Julian's same intense eyes. "Hello, brother," the man said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Long time no see." Julian stared at his brother, his jaw tightening. "Alex, what are you doing here?" Alex Merrick straightened his designer tie and smiled. "Is that any way to greet family?" "It's been 5 years, Julian." "How did you find me?" Julian demanded. "You're not as invisible as you think," Alex replied, scanning the property with calculating eyes. "Nice little setup you've got here. Very rustic." From inside the barn, Sienna watched the brothers, so similar in appearance, yet completely different in demeanor. Where Julian's confidence was quiet and steady, Alex radiated slick charm and ambition. "You didn't answer my question," Julian said. "Why are you here?" Alex sighed dramatically. "Business, unfortunately. Meridian Tech is facing a hostile takeover. The board wants you back." Julian laughed without humor. "The same board that stood by while you and Claire tried to push me out? They can go to hell." "Water under the bridge, brother," Alex said, waving his hand dismissively. "That was 5 years ago. Claire's long gone, and I've admitted my mistakes. The company needs you now." "I don't care what the company needs," Julian replied coldly. "I'm done with that life." Alex's pleasant mask slipped slightly. "This isn't just about the company. It's about your legacy, everything we built together. I remember doing most of the building while you handled the parties and press," Julian shot back. A flicker of anger crossed Alex's face before he composed himself. "There's something else you should know. I've discovered that Claire didn't act alone back then. Someone else was pulling the strings." Despite himself, Julian looked interested. "Who?" "Harold Preston," Alex said, watching Julian's reaction carefully. "He's been acquiring tech companies for years, using others to do his dirty work. Now he's coming after Meridian directly." In the barn, Sienna's breath caught. Harold Preston, Richard's father? The man she was supposed to have as a father-in-law by now. Could this be true? Julian crossed his arms. "Even if that's true, it's not my problem anymore. I signed everything over to you, remember? And I've kept your share safe." Alex insisted. "Julian, I know I betrayed your trust, but this is bigger than us. Preston will dismantle everything you built. All the innovations, the jobs, the foundation work. I need to think about it," Julian finally said. "You can go now." Alex reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "My number. Call me when you're ready to talk seriously." He turned to leave but paused. "Oh, and Julian, you might want to tell your house guest that hiding in barns isn't the best way to avoid the Prestons. They're offering a substantial reward for information about the runaway bride who humiliated their son." Julian's face remained impassive. "I don't know what you're talking about." Alex smiled knowingly. "Of course you don't, but if you did, you might warn her that the Prestons play dirty. Very dirty." He got back in his car and drove away. As soon as he was gone, Sienna emerged from the barn, her face pale. "He knows who I am." Julian nodded grimly. "He's always had a talent for knowing things he shouldn't." "Do you believe him? About Harold Preston being behind what happened to you?" Sienna asked. Julian ran a hand through his hair. "It makes a sick kind of sense. Preston has been buying up tech companies for years. He would have wanted Meridian's proprietary software." Sienna felt dizzy. "So the man who arranged my marriage was the same one who tried to destroy your company?" "Looks that way," Julian said. "Small world." That evening, dinner was a tense affair. Julian was lost in thought, responding to Sienna's attempts at conversation with one-word answers. Finally, she put down her fork. "Talk to me," she said softly. "What are you thinking?" Julian met her eyes. "I'm thinking it's time for both of us to stop hiding." "What do you mean?" Sienna asked. "I've been running from my past for 5 years," Julian explained. "You've been running for a week. Neither of us can keep running forever." Sienna felt a pang of fear. "Are you asking me to leave?" "No," Julian replied quickly. "I'm suggesting we both face our problems head-on. Together." Sienna's heart skipped a beat at the word together. Over the past week, something had grown between them, a connection that went beyond their shared circumstances, but she was afraid to name it, afraid to hope. "What do you have in mind?" she asked. "I need to look into what Alex told me about Preston," Julian said. "And you need to address the situation with your mother and the wedding." Sienna shook her head. "My mother won't listen. She's too obsessed with restoring our social position." "People can surprise you," Julian said. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have believed Alex would ever admit he was wrong. Maybe your mother needs to see you standing up for yourself." That night, Sienna lay awake, thinking about Julian's words. He was right. She couldn't hide forever. Sooner or later, she would have to face her mother, face the Prestons, face the world. The next morning, Julian announced he needed to go into town for supplies. "I'm coming with you," Sienna said firmly. Julian looked surprised. "Are you sure?" Tom said, "People are asking questions." "I'm tired of hiding," Sienna replied, echoing his words from the night before. The small town of Millfield was about 20 minutes from Julian's property. As they drove in his truck, Sienna felt both nervous and exhilarated. This was her first time leaving the farm since she'd arrived. "Stay close to me," Julian said as they parked on the main street. "And if anyone asks, you're my new farm assistant." Sienna smiled at the simple cover story. Well, it's not exactly a lie. They visited the hardware store first, where Julian was greeted warmly by the owner. No one seemed to recognize either of them as the reclusive billionaire or the runaway bride. There was a comfort in anonymity that Sienna had never appreciated before. At the grocery store, however, things changed. As they stood in the checkout line, Sienna noticed a woman staring at her, then whispering to her companion. Her stomach tightened with anxiety. Julian noticed too. He casually moved closer to Sienna, his hand resting protectively at the small of her back. The simple gesture gave her courage. When they left the store, a man approached them, camera in hand. "Excuse me, miss, are you Sienna Calder?" Before she could answer, he snapped a photo. Julian stepped between them. "Back off," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. "Hey, there's a reward for info about her," the man protested. "The Prestons are looking—" "I don't care who's looking," Julian interrupted. "Leave. Now." Something in his tone made the man retreat. Julian quickly guided Sienna to the truck, helping her inside before getting in himself. "So much for anonymity," Sienna said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've just put a target on your—" "Back too," Julian started the engine. "We knew this might happen. The question is, what do we do now?" Before Sienna could answer, Julian's phone rang. He frowned at the screen but answered it. "Sam, what's wrong?" His expression grew increasingly grim as he listened. "Are you certain?" "Yes, I understand. Keep digging." He hung up and turned to Sienna. "That was my lawyer. He's been looking into what Alex told me about Preston. It's worse than we thought." "What do you mean?" Sienna asked. "Preston hasn't just been trying to take over tech companies. He's been systematically destroying them when he can't control them. And now he's using Richard's name on legal documents to shield himself from liability." Sienna frowned. "Using Richard's name? I don't understand." "Your almost husband has been signing documents, putting his name on questionable business deals," Julian explained. "Deals that should have Preston Sr.'s name on them." A terrible realization dawned on Sienna. "The prenup. My mother made me sign it without reading it completely. What if it wasn't just about marriage? What if they were using me to get access to something else?" Julian's eyes widened. "The Calder land. Didn't you say it's been in your family for generations?" "Yes. My grandfather left it to me specifically, not to my parents," Sienna said. "My mother was always angry about that. She couldn't sell it without my signature." Julian pulled the truck over to the side of the road. Sienna, I think we need to see those prenup papers. What if you signed away more than just marital rights? Fear gripped Sienna's heart. All my documents are at my mother's house. I can't go back there. You might have to, Julian said gently. Sometimes the only way forward is to go back and face what you're running from. Sienna knew he was right, but the thought of confronting her mother terrified her. Will you come with me? Julian hesitated only a moment before nodding. Yes, but first we need to be prepared. When they returned to the farmhouse, Julian went straight to his office, making phone calls and searching through old files. Sienna sat on the porch, watching the sunset and trying to calm her nerves. Later, Julian found her there, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He sat beside her, their shoulders touching. My lawyer will meet us tomorrow, he said. He's bringing documents that prove Preston's pattern of corporate takeovers. Sienna nodded, taking the coffee gratefully. Julian, why are you doing all this for me? You barely know me. Julian was quiet for a long moment. When I lost everything, or what I thought was everything, I learned who really mattered in my life. It wasn't about the money or the power. It was about having someone who sees the real you, not what you can do for them. He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. This past week you've seen me. Not Julian Merrick the billionaire, not the recluse, just me. And I've seen you too. Sienna's heart raced as he reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I'm not good with words, he admitted, but when you came into that barn, something changed. I don't want to go back to how things were before. Sienna leaned into his touch. Neither do I. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative even, as if they were both afraid this fragile connection might break. When they pulled apart, Sienna saw something in Julian's eyes she hadn't seen before. Hope. Whatever happens tomorrow, Julian promised, we'll face it together. That night, as a storm rolled in over Blackstone Hill, Julian and Sienna sat in the living room planning their next move. Neither noticed the expensive car parked at the bottom of the hill, nor the 2 men watching the farmhouse through binoculars. In view. The car, Richard Preston lowered the binoculars and smiled coldly at his companion. Well, it seems the runaway bride has found herself a new friend. Wait until my father hears about this. His companion, a private investigator, looked uncomfortable. Sir, maybe we should just let her go. The wedding's off, and this was never about the wedding, Richard snapped. It's about the land, the contracts she signed, and the humiliation she caused my family. No one walks away from a Preston. He started the car. We'll be back tomorrow, with reinforcements. As the car drove away, the storm clouds opened, rain pouring down on the farmhouse, where Sienna slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, unaware of the danger approaching. Dawn broke over Blackstone Hill, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Sienna stood at the farmhouse window, watching the sunrise with a mixture of determination and fear. Today, they would confront her mother and, potentially, the Prestons. Ready? Julian asked, coming to stand beside her. Sienna turned to him, drawing strength from his presence. As ready as I'll ever be. Julian's lawyer, Sam Wilson, arrived just after breakfast. He was a serious man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. He spread documents across the kitchen table, pointing out highlighted sections. Harold Preston has a pattern, Sam explained. He identifies valuable properties or technologies, then uses legal manipulation to acquire them at a fraction of their worth. And you think that's what he was doing with my family's land? Sienna asked. Sam nodded. Based on what Julian told, me the timing fits. Your father's financial troubles followed by a sudden marriage arrangement between you and Richard Preston? But my mother was the one pushing for the marriage, Sienna pointed out. Was she in financial trouble after your father's scandal? Julian asked gently. Sienna thought about it. Yes, she had to sell most of her jewelry, and we moved from our house to a smaller one. She was desperate to maintain appearances. Preston might have approached her, Sam suggested, offered financial security in exchange for your marriage to his son and access to your land. Julian leaned forward. What we need is to see the actual prenuptial agreement Sienna signed. If Preston included land transfer clauses, we can prove... He was manipulating the situation. Sam looked at Sienna. Do you remember anything specific about what you signed? Sienna closed her eyes, trying to recall. It was thick, maybe 30 pages. My mother rushed me through it, saying it was just standard language to protect both families. I only clearly remember the parts about financial separation and divorce terms. That's not enough, Sam said, shaking his head. We need the actual document. It would be at my mother's house, Sienna said. She keeps important papers in her study. Julian checked his watch. We should go now. If that photographer from yesterday recognized you, word might already have reached the Prestons that you're in the area. The drive to Catherine Calder's house took nearly an hour. As they approached the elegant colonial-style home, Sienna's anxiety increased. She hadn't spoken to her mother since running away from the wedding. Maybe I should go alone, she suggested, as Julian parked down the street. Not a chance, he replied firmly. We stay together. Sienna led them to a side entrance, using her key to unlock the door. The house was quiet, too quiet. Mother? Sienna called out. No answer. They moved through the house carefully, finally reaching Catherine's study. The room was meticulously organized, with a large desk and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. The safe is behind that painting, Sienna said, pointing to a landscape on the wall. Julian moved the painting aside, revealing a small wall safe. Do you know the combination? My birthday, Sienna replied. My mother never was very creative with passwords. The safe opened easily, revealing stacks of documents. Sienna rifled through them until she found a thick folder labeled Preston Calder Agreement. This is it, she said, opening the folder. The prenuptial agreement was even longer than she remembered, filled with complex legal language. Sam took it, quickly scanning the pages with a practiced eye. Here, he said after a few minutes, his finger stopping on a paragraph buried deep in the document. This clause gives Richard Preston power of attorney over all Calder family assets, including landholdings, effective immediately upon marriage. Sienna felt sick, so I would have signed away my land without even realizing it. And this clause, Sam continued, flipping to another section, prevents you from contesting any business decisions made by Richard for a period of 10 years. They were going to take everything, Sienna whispered. Julian's expression hardened. We need copies of this. Sam pulled out his phone and began photographing each page. They were so focused on the document that they didn't hear the front door open. Well, what do we have here? They all turned to see Catherine Calder standing in the doorway, her expression cold and hard. Behind her stood Harold and Richard. Preston? Sienna, Catherine said, her voice tight with controlled anger. How nice of you to finally come home, and with company, I see. Sienna stepped forward. Mother, I can explain... Explain what? Catherine interrupted. How you humiliated our family? How you threw away the chance to restore our name and financial security? Is that all you care about? Sienna asked. Status and money. Did you even read what was in this prenup before you made me sign it? Catherine's eyes flickered to the document in Sam's hands. Of course I did. It was a standard agreement. Standard? Julian stepped forward. A standard agreement doesn't give your future son-in-law control over all your daughter's assets. Catherine looked genuinely confused. What are you talking about? Harold Preston cleared his throat. Mrs. Calder, perhaps we should discuss this privately. Julian turned to face Preston. I don't think so, Harold. We found the clause giving Richard power of attorney over all Calder holdings. The same tactic you used when you tried to take over Meridian Tech 5 years ago. Preston's face darkened. Merrick, I thought I recognized you. Still bitter about losing your company, I see. I didn't lose it, Julian replied calmly. I walked away. There's a difference. Preston laughed coldly. A difference that cost you billions. Mother, Sienna said urgently, they were using you. Using us. The marriage was just a way for them to get control of grandfather's land. Catherine looked at Harold Preston, uncertainty crossing her face. Is this true? Of course not, Richard interjected smoothly. Sienna is simply looking for excuses to justify her shameful behavior. Sam held up the prenuptial agreement. Then, you won't mind if we get this reviewed by an independent attorney. Or perhaps the media would be interested in how the Preston family conducts business. Harold's pleasant mask slipped. That document is private family business. So is my land, Sienna replied firmly. And I'm not signing it away to anyone. Julian stepped closer to Sienna, his shoulder touching hers in silent support. We have copies of everything, Preston. Your pattern of corporate takeovers, the manipulative contracts, all of it. You're bluffing, Harold snarled. Am I? Julian pulled out his phone, showing a screen with a drafted email. One click, and this goes to every major financial publication. I still have friends in those circles, Harold. People who would love to expose your methods. The room fell silent as the threat hung in the air. Harold and Richard exchanged glances. Mother, Sienna said softly, I'm sorry I ran away from the wedding the way I did, but I couldn't go through with it. Not just because of the contract, but because it wasn't right. I didn't love Richard and he didn't love me. Catherine looked at her daughter, really seeing her perhaps for the first time in years. You look different. I am different, Sienna replied. I've learned what I'm capable of, what really matters to me. Catherine's gaze shifted to Julian, understanding dawning in her eyes. And this man? He matters to you? Yes, Sienna said without hesitation. He does. Harold Preston stepped forward, his face red with anger. This is absurd, Catherine. Control your daughter. We had an agreement. An agreement you manipulated me into, Catherine replied, her voice gaining strength. One that would have given you control over my daughter's inheritance. Harold's expression turned ugly. You're making a mistake. I can ruin what's left of your family's reputation. No, Julian interrupted. You won't. Because if you try, everything we've found goes public. Your business practices, your manipulation of Richard's fiancées, all of it. Richard looked at his father in surprise. Fiancées, plural, Julian nodded. Sienna isn't the first, is she, Harold? There was Anna Watson before her, with her family's shipping business. And before that, Michelle Chen, whose family owned valuable patents. Harold's face paled. Even Richard looked shocked, as if this part of his father's scheme was news to him. It's over, Preston, Julian said firmly. Walk away now. Leave the Calders alone, and we'll keep what we know private. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Harold straightened his tie, regaining his composure. Come, Richard, we're leaving. Richard hesitated, looking at Sienna with an expression she couldn't quite read, perhaps regret, perhaps relief. I'm sorry, he said quietly before following his father out. Once they were gone, Catherine collapsed into a chair, looking suddenly older. What have I done? She whispered. Sienna knelt beside her mother. You were trying to protect us in your own way. But, Mom, we don't need the Prestons or their money. We still have the land, and more importantly, we have each other. Catherine looked at her daughter with tears in her eyes. When did you become so strong? Sienna smiled, glancing at Julian. When someone believed I could be. Later that afternoon, as they drove back to Blackstone Hill, Sienna felt lighter than she had in years. The confrontation had been difficult, but necessary. Her mother had agreed to come visit the farm in a few days to see the life Sienna was building. Do you think the Prestons will really back off? Sienna asked. Julian nodded. Harold Preston cares about his reputation above all else. He won't risk exposure. And Alex, will you help him with Meridian Tech? Julian was quiet for a moment. I don't know yet. Some bridges might be worth rebuilding. When they reached the farmhouse, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land. Julian took Sienna's hand as they walked to the barn, their barn, its blue doors gleaming in the fading light. What happens now? Sienna asked. Julian smiled, a real, unguarded smile that transformed his face. Now? We finish what we started. The barn? Sienna asked. Julian laughed softly. That too. He pulled her close, his arms encircling her waist. I was thinking of something more permanent. If you want to stay, that is. Sienna looked up at him, her heart full. I'm not running anymore. This is exactly where I want to be. As they stood there, the first stars appearing in the twilight sky, Sienna thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had run from a life that wasn't hers, only to find herself in a place and with a person that felt like home. "You know," Julian said thoughtfully, "we never did finish the inside of the barn." Sienna laughed. "Is that your way of saying there's more work to do?" "There's always more work to do," Julian replied, his eyes serious despite his smile. "Rebuilding takes time, whether it's a barn, a business, or a life." "Then it's a good thing we have time," Sienna said, resting her head against his chest, "and each other." As night settled over Blackstone Hill, the old barn stood silent witness to the beginning of something new, a love born of courage and truth, built on the foundations of who they really were, not who the world had told them to be. In the coming months, there would be challenges. Julian would eventually reconnect with his brother, helping to save Meridian Tech from Preston's takeover attempt. Sienna would use her business degree to start a small consulting firm, helping local farmers protect their land from developers. Catherine would learn to let go of her obsession with status, finding unexpected joy in the simple life of the countryside. But for now, in this moment, there was just a man and a woman standing in front of a barn they had rebuilt together, and the promise of all the days to come. "By the way," Julian said as they walked hand in hand toward the farmhouse, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you." "What's that?" Sienna replied. Julian's eyes twinkled. "How do you feel about horses? Because I was thinking this place could use a few." Sienna laughed, the sound carrying across the hills. "I think," she said, squeezing his hand, "that sounds perfect." And as the stars continued to appear one by one in the vastness above, two people who had once been lost found their way forward together. The end.